Okay, so welcome to the deep dive. So you're here because you're looking to seriously level up your English fluency.
Right.
And we're going to unpack some super valuable stuff here today. Think of it as a cheat sheet to getting a really strong grasp of like those absolute must-know strategies.
Yeah.
No fluff, just the good stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think about it. As a learner, as someone who's really trying to improve their English, you're probably wading through a ton of information, a ton of different advice, and it can be super overwhelming. So that's what we're going to do today. We've gone through a bunch of sources, and we've really boiled it down to what really moves the needle, those effective approaches to really boost your English without feeling like you're drowning in information.
Yeah. Exactly. It's like drinking from a fire hose out there, right? So much advice. We've got a really rich collection of insights here, and we're going to go right to the heart of what really matters. We're going to talk about building a rock-solid listening foundation, because everything else builds from there. And then we're going to crack the code of clear pronunciation. We're going to demystify those tricky idioms that always seem to trip people up. We're going to get comfortable with essential grammar. And we'll even tap into the power of understanding, like, the culture behind the language.
Yeah, that cultural piece is huge, and we're going to get into that later on. But the mission for this deep dive, it's really laser focused. We want to give you the actionable intelligence, the practical tools, the stuff that you can actually use. It's a path toward fluent, confident English, and we're going to lay it all out for you today.
Absolutely. I love that. Fluent and confident. That's the goal. Okay, so let's jump into it. And we're going to start with something that underpins literally everything else, and that is listening. I mean, our sources are crystal clear on this. Listening, it's not just about hearing words. It's the foundation. It's the bedrock upon which all your other language skills are built. You're speaking, you're reading, and you're writing. Like, imagine trying to build a skyscraper on shaky ground.
Right.
Not going to work.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that our sources make this really important distinction between passive and active listening. Now, you might have like English podcasts playing in the background, right? And that's great. That's exposure. But active listening is like a whole different level. It's about intentionally focusing, like really digging into the details and really striving to understand the meaning that's packed into each word, each sentence, each turn of phrase. Our sources just overwhelmingly suggest that this active engagement is what really moves you towards fluency.
So I'm curious about this. What are some of those like practical tips that our sources give for active listening? Where do you even begin with that?
So the first actionable tip that I see popping up a lot is this. Start with material that's at your current level. Now, some sources mention a B1 level as a general starting point, but, the core principle is that it doesn't matter where you are in your journey. If you jump into something that's way too complex, too advanced, it can be really discouraging. You're likely going to get lost, you're going to be frustrated, you won't absorb much. It's just not effective.
Yeah, it makes sense. You don't start lifting the heaviest weights on your first day at the gym, right?
Exactly. Our sources show that if you start with material that you can mostly understand, podcasts, videos designed for learners, that's where the magic happens. You naturally pick up new vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, and it's in this really supportive environment. And as you grow, you can gradually crank up the difficulty. It's all about steady progress, like climbing a mountain step by step.
Steady and sustainable. That makes sense. Now, another technique that our sources emphasize for active listening is note-taking. But it's not about trying to write down every single word, right?
Yeah, definitely not. That would be, impossible and pointless, right? Effective note-taking while actively listening is about capturing the essence, the key words, those phrases that really jump out at you. And then obviously any new vocab or cool expressions that you come across, you jot those down. It helps solidify them in your memory.
Yeah, and there's something about the physical act of writing, too. Even though you might not look back at the notes, I feel like it helps.
Oh, for sure. And here's a pro tip that I've seen in a few sources. When you hear a new phrase, Try to guess its meaning from the context before you run to the dictionary. It's like a mini workout for your brain, and it really helps you retain the information.
Yeah, totally. It's like solving a puzzle.
Yeah.
Okay, so what happens when you inevitably miss something? Or like you want to really lock in what you've just heard?
Replay button, my friend. Seriously, don't be afraid to use it. Our sources consistently highlight the benefit of replaying sections. This lets you catch those subtle nuances, the stuff you might have missed on the first pass. And pausing, just taking a moment to mentally chew on the information. That's also a huge part of active listening. It's like letting the ideas sink in.
Right, like really savoring it.
Ah.
Okay, now there's this technique that popped up in a few of our sources called shadowing, and it sounds super intriguing. Can you explain how it works?
So shadowing is this really cool technique where you essentially repeat what the speaker is saying, but you do it almost simultaneously like you're their echo. The idea is to mimic their rhythm, their pronunciation, even their intonation as closely as you can. And this like real-time mirroring does something really amazing.
So you listen to like a little chunk, and then you immediately try to repeat it back, really paying attention to all those subtle things.
Exactly. And it has this dual benefit, right? It trains your ear to recognize how words are naturally pronounced, how sentences flow. And it also works on your own pronunciation and speaking skills because you're forced to articulate in real time. It's like a pronunciation workout.
It sounds pretty intense, but definitely effective.
Yeah, and don't worry about being perfect right away. Start small, maybe a sentence or two, pause, rewind, go at your own pace. The more you do it, the more your own speech starts to mirror those natural English patterns.
That's a cool technique. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so last piece on active listening from our sources. They talk about practicing in different environments. Why is it so beneficial to like move beyond that quiet study space?
Because the real world is noisy and unpredictable, right? English isn't always spoken in this perfectly controlled, quiet environment. It's like there's background chatter, people are talking fast, they're using slang. And our sources are suggesting that if you practice listening in different settings, like on your commute, in a cafe, even with the TV on in the background, it helps your brain adapt. It's like training your ears to filter out the noise and focus on the message.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like building those mental muscles.
Exactly. Plus, you're going to be exposed to different accents, which is so important because, let's face it, English is a global language. It's
Right.
got all these beautiful variations: American, British, Australian, Indian, so many others.
Right. So, okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about another cornerstone of fluency, which is pronunciation. And I think it's important to say that clear pronunciation is not just about sounding good, it's really about communication,
Yeah.
right? It boosts your confidence when you can speak clearly and be understood.
100%. Our sources emphasize that, yes, vocabulary is important, grammar is important, but if your pronunciation isn't clear, it can really hinder communication. You can have all the right words, but if people can't understand you, it's like talking through a wall.
Yeah, it defeats the purpose. So where do we even begin with improving pronunciation?
Well, again, it starts with listening. You've got to actively listen to native speakers. Pay attention to how they articulate words, their rhythm, the rise and fall of their voice, where they place the emphasis. We call that intonation and stress, and we'll get to those in a second.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like training your ear to recognize those patterns.
Yeah, exactly. And then, there are certain sounds that are notoriously challenging for many learners. The th sound, for example, as in think this, it doesn't exist in many languages, and that can be a tough one to master.
Oh yeah, the PT is famous for being tricky.
Yeah, right. And our sources explain that to get the T right, it's all about the placement of your tongue. The tip should be gently between your upper and lower teeth, and then you kind of expel air. It's subtle, but it makes a big difference. And practice is key. Words like think, this, that, thanks, just keep practicing those.
So it's a physical thing as much as a mental thing. You've got to train your mouth to do something new.
Absolutely. And it's not just the T, right? Sounds like the R, particularly in American English, and that short I, as in bit, can also be really tough for a lot of people. But with focused practice, you can definitely improve.
Oh, nice. Okay, so let's talk about intonation. That's the melody of your speech, right? The way your voice rises and falls. How important is that for sounding natural?
Intonation is huge. It's what gives English its musicality, its flow, and it conveys so much meaning beyond the words themselves. Think about the difference between a statement and a question. I'm going to the store ends on a falling intonation. It's a statement of fact. But are you going to the store has a rising intonation at the end, indicating a question.
Oh, that's a great point. I never really thought about it consciously, but it makes a huge difference.
It really does. And a great way to practice intonation is to mimic native speakers, watch videos or listen to podcasts with subtitles and really focus on how their pitch changes throughout a sentence.
So it's about tuning your ear to those subtle changes in pitch.
Exactly. Now let's talk about stress. We've got word stress and sentence stress. Word stress is about which syllable in a multisyllable word receives the strongest emphasis, like photograph is stressed on the first syllable, but photographer is stressed on the second. Misplacing stress can change the meaning of the word, and it definitely impacts clarity.
Yeah, like I remember learning the word present, and it was so confusing because it has two completely different meanings depending on which syllable is stressed.
Exactly, it can be tricky. And then sentence stress is about which words in a sentence you emphasize. And generally, we stress content, words, the nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, the words that carry the main meaning. Function words, like articles and prepositions, those are usually unstressed. So in the sentence, I'm going to the store later, the natural emphasis would be on going, store, and later.
Okay, so it's like highlighting the important words, the ones that carry the most weight.
Exactly. And again, a great way to learn this is to listen to native speakers. Pay attention to where they put the emphasis. You'll start to pick up on those patterns.
I'm picking up a theme here. It's all about listening, isn't it?
It really is. You've got to train your ears. Okay, now our sources suggest a super direct, but maybe initially a little uncomfortable method for identifying pronunciation errors.
Uh-oh, I think I know where this is going.
Record yourself. I know it can feel weird hearing your own voice, but trust me, it's so valuable. Record yourself speaking English and then compare it to how a native speaker would say the same thing.
Okay, it's like holding a mirror up to your speech.
It is. You get to hear yourself as others do, and that's something we don't normally experience. It's super helpful for identifying those areas where your pronunciation might be a little off.
That makes sense. Okay, what about practicing with native speakers?
There's no substitute for real-time interaction. Language exchange programs, online platforms, in-person meetups, anything where you can actually have a conversation with a native speaker. It's the best way to practice pronunciation in a natural context and get feedback both directly and indirectly.
So it's about getting out of your comfort zone and actually using the language.
Yep. It's where the real magic happens. And for people who like a more structured approach, there are tons of great online tools and apps that can help with pronunciation.
Oh yeah, like what?
There are apps like Elsa Speak, Speechling, Pronunroid. These apps use AI to analyze your speech and give you feedback on how close you are to a native speaker's pronunciation. They can be a great supplement to your learning, especially for targeting specific sounds or words that you find challenging.
Awesome. Technology coming to the rescue. All right, let's move on to another fascinating and often very confusing area of fluency, which is understanding idioms. You know, those phrases that have a figurative meaning, and they can add so much color and personality to your English. But they can also be a bit mind-boggling if you're not familiar with them.
Yeah, they're tricky, but they're also so much fun once you get the hang of them. It's like unlocking a secret code.
Totally. So How do we even begin to tackle idioms?
The key is to understand that idioms are phrases where the overall meaning isn't a literal combination of the individual words. Like, take break the ice, for example. It doesn't mean you're literally smashing a block of ice. It means you're starting a conversation or making people feel more comfortable.
Right, it's about easing the tension.
Exactly. Another one is hit the nail on the head. It means you've described something perfectly, you've got it exactly right. And then there's under the weather, which means you're feeling a bit sick. Or burn the midnight oil, working late into the night. A piece of cake means something is super easy.
I love that one. A piece of cake.
Yeah, they're so colorful, and the best way to learn them is to encounter them in natural contexts, conversations, books, movies, and then try to use them in your own speech and writing. Flashcards can also be helpful. Just write down the idiom, its meaning, and maybe an example sentence.
That makes sense. It's about exposure and practice. Okay, and now for the less glamorous but equally important part of fluency, grammar. I know it's not as exciting as idioms, but a solid foundation in basic grammar, like sentence structure, is essential. It's about clarity. It's about being able to express yourself clearly and effectively.
Couldn't agree more. Our sources actually break down some fundamental sentence structures, and these are so important for clear communication. It all starts with the simple sentence. Usually it follows a subject-verb-object order like I eat apples. Or you can have a linking verb like she is a teacher. Simple sentences, those are your building blocks. And an independent clause, it's a complete thought. It can stand on its own as a sentence.
Okay, that's the foundation. So what comes next?
Then you have compound sentences. It's basically connecting two complete thoughts, two independent clauses, with a coordinating conjunction. Words like and, but, or so, or because. For example, I want to go to the park, but it's raining outside. So you're connecting two ideas within a single sentence, but they're still distinct. It creates a nice flow.
Right, like a bridge between two thoughts.
Exactly. Now, complex sentences, those are your next level up. They contain one independent clause and at least one dependent clause. And a dependent clause, it can't stand alone as a sentence. It needs the main clause for its full meaning. And these clauses are often introduced by a subordinating injunction, words like although, because, if, when, while, since.
So can you give me an example of a complex sentence?
Sure, how about this? Although it's raining, I still want to go to the park. You see how the dependent clause, although it's raining, adds more context to the main clause. And these complex sentences, they allow you to express more nuanced relationships like cause and effect, contrast, time sequence.
Okay, so it adds more depth and complexity to your writing and speaking. Got it. Now, questions. Questions are obviously super important in any conversation. What are the key things to remember when forming questions in English?
So our sources highlight two main types of questions: yes/no questions and WH questions. Yes/no questions, you're typically inverting the subject and the auxiliary verb, like you are tired becomes are you tired?
Yeah.
Or you add an auxiliary verb if there isn't one already. So you like coffee becomes do the like coffee.
Okay, so it's about changing the word order or adding an auxiliary verb. And what about WH questions?
Those are the ones that start with a question word: who, what, where, when, why, how. And then it's usually question word, auxiliary verb, subject, and main verb, like what time does the meeting start? Or where do you live? Mastering these question structures, it's essential for understanding and participating in conversations.
It's like the key to unlocking any conversation. You got to be able to ask questions.
For sure. Now, last but not least, let's talk about adjectives and adverbs. They might seem basic, but they add so much detail and richness to your English.
Right. They're the spice of the language. They add flavor.
Exactly. So adjectives, they're your descriptive words for nouns. They give you more information about their qualities, like beautiful voice, interesting book. And adverbs, they modify verbs. Adjectives, other adverbs, they tell you how, when, where, or to what extent something is done or described. Runs quickly, very clearly, incredibly well.
So adjectives are about nouns, and adverbs are about verbs and other stuff.
Pretty much. And
Yeah.
using them correctly makes your English much more precise and colorful.
Okay, great. So we've covered a lot of ground here, but there's one more dimension that we need to talk about, and it's often overlooked. It's understanding the cultural context in which English is used, because it's about more than just the dictionary definitions, right? It's about the nuances, the unspoken rules, the cultural references that shape the way people use language.
Absolutely. Language and culture, they're like two sides of the same coin. And developing an understanding of the cultural nuances behind English, it can really elevate your fluency. It helps you sound more natural, more in tune with how native speakers actually use the language.
So it's like learning the secret handshake, the insider knowledge.
Exactly. And one area where cultural differences are super obvious is humor. British humor, it's often very dry, sarcastic, whereas American humor tends to be more direct, more slapstick sometimes. Being aware of these differences helps you understand jokes. It helps you participate in conversations without accidentally saying something that's totally inappropriate.
Yeah, it's so important. You don't want to be the one who's always missing the joke or accidentally offending someone.
Right. And another thing to keep in mind is that so many common phrases and idioms are actually rooted in specific cultural references.
Can you give me an example?
Sure, think about Hollywood ending. That implies a perfectly happy ending, maybe even a little unrealistic. But to really get it, you need to understand the cultural significance of Hollywood in the film industry. Or, traditions like Thanksgiving in the US or afternoon tea in the UK. These cultural practices give rise to all sorts of phrases and references that you won't necessarily find in a dictionary.
So it's like having a cultural decoder ring.
It is. It unlocks a whole layer of meaning. And then there's social etiquette, politeness, even something as simple as saying please and thank you, the frequency, the context that can vary across cultures. And the level of directness in communication can be different too. Like in the UK, people might be more indirect when giving feedback or disagreeing compared to the US. Being aware of these nuances helps you avoid misunderstandings and navigate social interactions more smoothly.
It's like learning the unspoken rules of the game.
Exactly. And it's not just about what you say, it's also about how you say it. Nonverbal communication plays a huge role too. Eye contact, personal space, gestures, all of those things can have different meanings across cultures. So, what might be considered polite and engaged in one context could be rude or intrusive in another.
That's fascinating. It's like learning a whole new language beyond just the words themselves.
It is. And finally, our sources talk about the importance of learning about the history and traditions of English-speaking countries because it gives you a richer, more nuanced understanding of the language itself.
Okay, so how does that work?
So many expressions, cultural references, even grammatical structures can be traced back to specific historical events or cultural practices. Like, think about the phrase, mind the gap on the London Underground. It's a simple inscription, but it has a historical context. It's a reminder of the gap between the train and the platform, and understanding that history gives the phrase a richer meaning.
It's so interesting. It's like each phrase has a story behind it.
It does, and knowing those stories, it helps you appreciate the language on a deeper level.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground here. Let's do a quick recap of what we've learned.
Yeah, we've talked about the foundational role of active listening. Remember those techniques? Effective note-taking, shadowing, practicing in different environments. And then we delved into pronunciation. We talked about mastering challenging sounds, understanding intonation, applying stress patterns, recording yourself, and practicing with native speakers. We demystified some common English idioms, and we emphasized the importance of solid grammar, from simple sentences to complex questions.
Right, and we can't forget about that crucial element of cultural awareness. It's about understanding cultural nuances, social etiquette, historical context. All of that adds so much depth and richness to your understanding of English.
Exactly. And the key takeaway here, the thing that runs through all of our sources, is that consistency is key. You've got to practice all of these elements. You got to integrate them into your daily routine. It's not about focusing on one thing in isolation. It's about weaving it all together.
It's like a tapestry, right? All the threads come together to create the final picture.
Perfectly said. So, as you continue on your journey to fluency, make a conscious effort to actively use these techniques. Listen with intent, practice your pronunciation, learn idioms in context, pay attention to sentence structure, and explore those cultural nuances.
Right, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's part of the process.
Absolutely. Mistakes are your teachers. And one final thought to leave you with. As you're learning English, think about how your own cultural background might be influencing your approach to the language. And think about how embracing other cultures can actually help you unlock even deeper levels of understanding and fluency.
That's a powerful idea.
It is. It's about expanding your horizons and seeing the world through a different lens.
Awesome. Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
I hope so.
As always, thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
And happy learning.